Hey, Catherine, can you hear me okay?
I can. Now I know you're not the only one in this room, so I must have my view screwed up.
No, it's just me. You and I are the only two so far. I'm starting
Oh,
early
it's
just to,
just early.
yeah,
We're
you're a
just
few minutes
early.
early. I'm just testing out a couple things with my screen, making
Awesome.
sure this is all working. We've got a couple guest presenters tonight.
So different office? No, home. You're at home.
I am
Right?
at home. Yes.
Nice. How's everybody been doing? And how's your babies?
Hanging in there. How
Good.
about you?
It's all good. It's every day is an adventure. Just a different one.
Yes, that's for sure. I'm just letting people in from the waiting room.
Awesome.
Let me check out my screen sharing here. Mhm. There we go. Okay.
I love the picture.
Yeah. A lot of our county slideshows have the courthouse, but after quite a bit of different training and input from different colleagues, it's become apparent to me that using the courthouse as an image is really off-putting for some folks who have really bad memories of involvement with criminal justice system. And so focusing more on parks and pastoral stuff to make sure that we're being trauma informed. Okay, let me go ahead and stop screen sharing so we can see each other. Hey, George, how are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Just looking to see who's here.
Yeah. Hey, Cindy. Hey, Jan. I'm good. You can hear me okay. Charles, how you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Good. Good to hear you. I can see your picture. Oh, there you are. Oh, it looks like you're pretend camping.
Not too much different. I just got back late last night. I had to leave town for a memorial, so not for a fun reason, but still got out of town.
Sorry.
So.
I saw Melissa pop in for a second. I want to make sure your audio is working okay.
Yeah, my audio is working. It says my virtual background is still loading, which seems a little weird.
Well,
Let's see. Huh. Well, I'm here.
okay, good.
Don't know what that's about, though.
Want to make sure that our note taker has joined the meeting and that her audio is good, but I don't see her here yet. So we'll give folks one more minute.
Hey, Julie, I'm going to exit and retry to see if my video comes back.
No problem. Go for it.
Thanks.
Oh, good, Barbara. You were able to exit your meeting early. I see you. And I heard from a couple board members that they might be a little late or not able to join tonight. Oh, good. Here's Paula. Paula, hi. How is your audio? I want to make sure that you can hear everything before I start the meeting. Paula, is your audio good?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes,
Give me,
it's good. Thanks.
give me 1 second and then I will start the meeting. Okay, folks, let's kick off your February 2022 Hope Advisory Board meeting. I see most board members are here, but I'll continue to have my distraction happening a little bit as I admit people from the waiting room. And I'll go ahead and start your meeting. Welcome all. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you so you can see an overview of the agenda. And for some Zoom housekeeping, you should be muted when you join, and there'll be a chance for public comment. So if you can, please type into the chat your name and the topic of your public comment that you'd like to make. And I'll also provide an opportunity for folks who have called in on the phone, although I don't see any at this point. Here's an overview of your agenda today. After I do this overview and acknowledge your agreements and the culture that you wanted to set for the meeting, we'll have public comment for your public meeting up to 10 minutes, and then introduce some new board members, which I know everybody's really excited about. And then we'll do roll call to approve your January meeting minutes. And an educational component. Today, we've got some guest speakers from CSC, Community Services Consortium, and also OSU's H.O.P.E, Oregon State University's Policy Analysis Lab, talking about the point in time count and its purpose and the role that it plays. And then I'm going to touch on the equity lens that your equity consultant put together for the board, just to reiterate it and ask the questions involved in that lens to make sure they're at the forefront of your mind as you enter into the seventh thing on your agenda, a discussion of the role that you'll play going forward, likely a communication and an assessment of the progress in the community role, and doing some research on different evidence-based practices or best practices that align with your HOPE recommendations. So here is I'm sorry, I'm just getting a text message from one of the board members. She might need a little support to join. But on the screen here are the ideas that you all put up on the board the first meeting you had. Many of you attended, some of you were not part of the board at that point, but just wanting to reiterate the kind of culture you would like to set as the HOPE Advisory Board, with respect and curiosity and kindness and inclusivity. And you've done a great job of sticking to that culture. So I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing to see if we have anybody who wanted to do a public comment at today's meeting. I am not seeing any folks who have put anything into the chat. And I'm not seeing any folks who have called in on a phone. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that there is no public comment today. And we'll go ahead and move on with your meeting. Okay, we have some new board members with the HOPE Advisory Board, and I'll stop screen sharing so that you can hear from them, their introductions of their name, pronouns, organization, and the perspective or viewpoint they're bringing to the board. Our last board member is joining us right now. Great, I'm so glad he's here. I also included their bios that are going to be updated on the HOPE Advisory Board website as one of the slides for folks who aren't able to join today. But let me go ahead and stop screen sharing. And we will start with Cade. Go for it.
Hi everyone, my name's Cade, my pronouns are they, them. Currently I'm a peer support specialist at the Benton County Health Department. Also a recent OSU public health grad, but I sit on the advisory board for the OSU P.I.T Center. I'm a LGBTQ health equity educator in the community, and one of the perspectives I'm bringing to the board is lived experience with homelessness in Benton County.
Thanks so much, Cade. I'm just texting with Bria, one of the new board members who's having some tech issues, so I'm gonna help her call in. So next we'll go to Chanel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chanel. I am a staff counselor and also coordinator of African American and Black student mental health and wellness at Oregon State University. She, her pronouns. I've been in Oregon for about 7 months now. I moved from North Carolina here to start this position. The perspective that I'm bringing is one being a Black woman in Corvallis, a predominantly white space. So the ethnic and the race perspective, as well as some mental health aspects as well.
Thanks, Chanel. And Ari, how's your audio today?
Hi,
Good.
I'm Ari Grossman Naples and he, him pronouns. I'm currently on the Corvallis Sister Cities Association board, and I also serve on the CSCA Gondar Council as their social media coordinator. I have lived experience with homelessness. I'm a past volunteer with the Corvallis Men's Cold Weather Shelter. I have a bachelor's in management and business information systems and a master's in graphic arts publishing with special emphasis in marketing and public relations. I am married with 4 children, and we are a multiracial family, and we live on our small farm in Philomath. I am really excited and honored to be a part of this board and to be working with you to, implement some housing solutions for our homeless populations in Benton County. So thank you for having me as part of your team.
Thank you, Ari. And I think I saw Bria just join. Bria, how is your audio today? Yay.
I think it's working.
Yep, you're working. Go ahead and introduce yourself with a little of the perspective that you bring to the board.
Okay, there we go. So I was having technical difficulties joining. So my name is Bria. Hello. I have been in Corvallis for a little over 2 years.
Bria, we're getting a little bit of a lag with your audio, so
And
I hate to ask you to do this, but would you mind turning off your video?
Oh,
that might help with the connection.
Is it helping a little bit?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, go ahead and start again. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, you're good. I have been in Corvallis for a little bit over 2 years. I have some experience with homelessness and near homelessness, especially in the DC area, since I moved from Maryland, 3,000 miles away for a fresh start. And I heard about Charles, and I was more than happy to want to be a part of this. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Bria. We're glad you're here. And last but certainly not least, Melissa Isavorin.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well today, even though it's really cold right now. Melissa Isavorin, she, her, hers. I run the Medicaid operations for IHN CCO out of Samaritan. We do have a regional focus, Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln counties. We are very focused on population health and health equity and kind of supporting or wrapping our arms around our community partners and the social determinants of health that impact our members and our community in general. I am very familiar with the complexities of houselessness and the many reasons why individuals end up in that situation or are on the cusp of being homeless and some of the issues surrounding of course, what it's like to be homeless in terms of, housing availability, shelter availability, access to food, access to clothing, and all of those things. And again, IHN is really trying to ensure community supports and support our community benefit organizations in helping out in this area. So I appreciate you being at the table here, and I hope to provide some perspective and some support.
Thanks, Melissa. And previously, Bruce Butler had been the representative from IHN for the past 2 years, and he is passing the torch to Melissa now. So Bruce will no longer be on the board with you, although he has loved being a part of the Hope board. And now Melissa will be the representative for IHN. Well, welcome. I am so thrilled to have all of you here as new board members, and you bring a variety of perspectives. So thank you for joining. Okay, we will move on to the next item in your agenda. And I have included this for folks who were not able to join tonight because a lot of people look at the slides after the meeting. Just a reminder about the possibility of any of our new board members and older existing board members being co-chairs going forward. Next month in March, at your March board meeting, you will be electing 2 co-chairs to serve on the executive committee, and they help set the agendas and really provide a leadership role with how the board does their work going forward. So if you have any questions about that, reach out to me so I can answer them before next month. Okay, Paula, I'm going to be doing roll and approval of the note taking. And for our new board members who are just joining us and we're not at last month's meeting, you can just say, hi, I'm here and I abstain from the vote. But first we need a motion from one of the board members to approve your minutes. I received no edits about the minutes.
So moved.
So moved.
I think I heard George first.
Second that.
Oh boy. George, I heard you move it and I'm not sure who seconded.
It was Brian.
Brian Cotter seconded. Okay, thank you so much. Catherine Bisco, are you here and do you vote to approve the minutes?
I am here and vote to approve. Yes.
Thank you. Carol.
I am here and I vote to approve.
Thanks. Brian.
You there? Yeah.
Yep, I can
Approved.
hear you. Okay, thank you. I heard approved. Cade.
I'm here and I abstain from the vote.
Thank you. Anita. Anita, are you with us here yet today? I do not see you yet. Okay. Joel.
Here and approved.
Thanks. George.
Here and approved.
Ari.
Here and abstain.
Thank you. Barbara.
Here and approved.
Melissa.
Here and approved.
I think you have to abstain, Melissa, because you were not a board member last month, even though you did attend as a community member.
Okay, good point. Then I will abstain. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Bria. Bria, I can't hear you if you are trying to talk.
Can you hear
But
me
I
now?
know, yes, I can. Go for it.
Okay, here and abstain.
Thanks. Cindy.
Here and approve.
Charles.
Here and approve.
Peggy, I don't think can be here tonight. I'm just gonna double check. Peggy, have you joined? She said she would likely not be able to be here tonight. No, she is not. You can mark her excused, Paula. Jim. Jim Warfield, I thought I saw you earlier. Are you trying to talk? I can't hear you if you are.
My buttons weren't cooperating. Here and approved.
Thank you. Andrea.
Here and approve.
Jan.
Here, approve.
Chanel.
Here and abstain.
Reese.
I'm here and approve.
Nancy.
Yes and yes.
Thank you all. Your meeting minutes passed from last time. And just a reminder that we get those up on the website, thanks to Kaylee Olson and other staff with the health department within a week after you approve them. So they should be posted on the Hope website by next Wednesday. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen to welcome our guest presenters from Community Services Consortium and also from OSU's Policy Analysis Laboratory. Now, I will stop sharing and check in with you all. How is your audio, Melissa?
Well, thank you. I think my audio is just fine. How's audio?
It's great.
Good.
I can hear you.
And the video's a mystery, but we'll just keep moving on. I've been on Zooms today and this is not what happened. So anyway, here we are. So I'll just briefly introduce myself. I was the coordinator for CSC for the P.I.T count for 3 counties, Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln, and worked with Dr. Mark Edwards of Opal. And Mark, if you just want to, if you want to chime in and describe Opal's role and any other things you'd like.
Hi, everybody. I have met a couple of you on earlier projects over the years that some of my graduate students have worked on with you in the community. Opal is a gathering of quite a few grad students, some funded, some volunteer, and I work with them to work on projects to assist off-campus partners who have interesting and important questions they need answered using social science research methods. So this year we had a chance to work with CSC on the P.I.T count, and we're working on a variety of other projects helping some communities and a survey about food security among OSU students. So I'm glad to be here with you today, and Melissa will present most of the material, but as needed, I'll comment on some of the things we worked on with the sampling efforts for the P.I.T count.
Thanks, Mark. So I'll just briefly go over the point. The P.I.T count stands for point in time. And it is an annual effort to count the number of sheltered and unsheltered homeless people that meet HUD's definition. And that means sleeping in emergency shelter, transitional housing, and places not meant for human habitation. Everyone pretty much agrees that HUD is generally an undercount, but there's still reasons why we do it. Because Julie asked me to be on this meeting, I reached out directly to HUD because I had never really heard a great answer as to, okay, what are these numbers used for? So his answer was general, and then Mark and I had a meeting with William Snow. He's the Office of Special Needs Assistance Programs, and he's the rural lead for the P.I.T counts across the country. And he was general yesterday as well. So, but it's basically that it's a tool for local planning to ensure, local jurisdictions understand or make an effort to understand what's going on in their homeless populations. And then regarding the HUD competitive funding process, it's just one of the numbers that are used. There's always cautions to take P.I.T counts if you're looking at data over time. Take them with some caution in that you can think of methodologies changing over time. And so it's not an exact science, but there are helpful things about it. I think Corvallis can have a lot of confidence about the numbers that we'll eventually have. One of the keys to getting this done in a really competent fashion is having really good street outreach. And through lots of the community partners, of course, Andrea, who's on the call, and other folks, and really the Daytime Drop-In Center, and Maddie Bean, who's been leading the street outreach effort, a 20-person volunteer effort by a half-time employee. She's been working for a year and has done a great job. So once we eventually have numbers for you today, I don't even have draft numbers. We still have to finalize them and then also look at the impacts of the sampling. This year we tried to bring on a sampling methodology, which means paying closer attention to a smaller geographic region. And Mark, you know, that's why we had to bring on OSU, because as we realized, there's a lot of people who it's just not their thing, and it's hard to understand for a lot of the people involved. But it's great to have Mark on that. So we worked with the app provider called Counting Us to try and develop the sampling map for the 26 counties of the Rock, which means some of the areas in Benton County were surveyed and others were not. And then we're going to aggregate that data, and Mark's group is going to work on that and make us a report. So let me see other comments from Mark. Do you want to chime in with anything before I move on?
The idea of sampling was simply that it's it seems like a great possibility or opportunity to come up with a good estimate, taking seriously the limited amount of resources and personnel and volunteer time for the entirety of all of the rural counties of Oregon that are part of the rural Oregon continuum of care. So we ended up using parts of census tracts in each of the counties randomly selected. And then from that, we'll be able to make some assessments of what was the number of unsheltered persons on that night. So that's the next step now that we've collected that data, is to aggregate or extrapolate back up from those samples so that we can report out that number.
Thank you. So yeah, the numbers will be coming out. The reporting requirements for HUD are by the end of April. So hopefully we'll have draft numbers before folks, things that we can feel comfortable sharing, but not quite there. Something that's also important to point out about the PIT count is what it does not tell us. There's a lot of people who have unstable housing situations and would call themselves homeless, but if you're doubled up, that's not counted. There's many vehicles not counted. So there's a lot of ways to experience homelessness that's not counted by the PIT. So that's one of the ways you consider this number for what it is, and then just know what it does not represent. So what else? Oh, well, I did speak with Maddie Bean to get her feedback on leading the PIT count this year. And one of the top priority requests she actually wanted me to pass on to this board was that one of the most challenging things is the posting of camps. And 2 weeks didn't really happen and isn't enough time in the first place. So putting off the posting and moving camps for at least a month before the PIT count, because there's a lot of actual, like, we're lucky in Corvallis to have this relationship development going, and then to have those camps posted and have those relationships interrupted without question impacts our PIT count. So that was one that would be good as a group effort to work on better with the important partners in that next year. Things like, well, one, me as the coordinator, I certainly needed more help than a one-person show in the Omicron surge. That wasn't great. And things that we could bring in are things like incentives to help facilitate conversations with people, which is largely hot food. But I couldn't pay for that and couldn't quite pull that off. So there's ways in which we can get better PIT counts. Perhaps not across the entire Rock, but certainly focusing on Benton County. Let's see. Oh, and this was, I thought, an interesting note. The unsheltered people that the Corvallis Street Outreach team are visiting are the more complicated cases. They seem to be the most left out. 60% do not even come to the daytime drop-in center. They're too far away, too sick, or just not interested. So they're reaching a lot of the people who we're most concerned about and least well suited. They are kind of, as it came up with a meeting in with Corvallis Housing First the other week, that there's a group of folks who are beyond permanent supported housing, and a lot of them are unsheltered. So anyway, those are some of the points I wanted to make, and I'd be happy to take on to open the floor to questions.
Melissa, can I ask, did you want to share your screen at all to share any visuals of what you
I
have been
would
talking about?
love to, but the whole camera issue.
You should still be able to share screen.
Oh, do you think?
I would think so. Yeah. If try clicking on it.
Yeah, I will.
And see if you're able to share.
Oh.
It says you've started screen sharing.
Do you see a document?
I do. Yeah.
Oh,
Yep,
good.
yep.
There you go. This was what Dr. Edwards was referring to.
And you know, if you
Visual
can
here.
zoom in a little bit on your Word doc
Yes,
to
I
make that a little
absolutely
bit bigger, I think that would be helpful. Yeah, there we go.
Little less zoomy. Zoomy. Okay. There we go. So the PIT count, as it's this census versus sampling thing, the PIT count as it's designed is supposedly a census. Well, that would take an actual effort like the US Census. So sampling really is a very good way, I think, for the rural areas to go, especially considering our large, geographic area of interest. So that's why it was so interesting. And of course, we'll see how this pilot year went. But HUD is certainly emphasizing that sampling is what they want to see going forward.
Yeah, and I think the visuals that I found most helpful to understand sort of how big the rural Oregon continuum of care is that we are a part of, and that we are really tied to that. I think that was a really powerful visual.
This is just their logo, but all this blue here, is this well enough in the Zoom area? Not very good pixels there. But the rural Oregon continuum of care is an enormous area. And that is one of the bummers. Once Mark and I saw that sampling map, just how large our areas were, it was like a little deflated. From the data perspective, like it's rough. Like this image up here, this is New Hampshire. Their areas get to be really small because of their dense population. And just data project wise, that's just way better. Imagining, putting volunteers out in this area is way easier than our area. So, yeah, and so the rural Oregon continuum of care for the new folks, that is a way that we organize housing funding among a few other things. But for the rural Oregon continuum of care, we CSC, with our 3 counties, work together with all of these other counties, and then in this large list here, to coordinate our data entry. We also share 3 overworked staffers to try and organize our efforts and our service point, our homeless management information system. So it is a very large area. And that is what Opal took on this year. We are so lucky. I think the partnership with Opal is going to be like the #1 good thing that we got this year for the general quality of our PIT counts going forward.
Thank you for that.
Sorry, continuity that nobody has. It was all new staffers, including myself, doing this.
Well, and
So-
I oftentimes get asked, why don't we do it differently? Or, why do we do it this way? So I think understanding that Benton County is part of this rural Oregon continuum of care of 26 counties when it comes to the point in time count and the methodology and the app that has to be used and for different purposes with HUD really helps people understand that it's above our heads sometimes.
It is, and it impacted the schedule and the slowness and certain things which I did not know to plan for, and I do now. I see a question, please.
And Melissa, would you mind stopping screen sharing
Oh,
so that we can see everybody again?
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, go for it, Carol. You're muted though, Carol.
Is there any effort in doing this where we can determine where people are coming from to this, addressing the constant question we get about people coming to Corvallis because we have really good services, and many of us know that people from Corvallis go to other places to get services. So is there any effort at knowing geographically where, when you do the PIT count?
Yes, that is a question in the count, and I'll be happy to follow up with the exact questionnaire. I will say, based on the data quality and using volunteers, the data quality is it's rather poor in that there is a lot of people who didn't get to the full survey. It's 30 questions. It's really a lot. So Corey, who's not here, he's a CSC staffer and he manages our data, but he starts very early. And since we don't have firm numbers, I didn't want him, to stay here and not be able to answer questions anyway. But so yes, that specific question is asked because every jurisdiction in the world gets asked that. As if by providing any services, it's some magical draw. It's really not. There might be a few people who move for various reasons, certainly fires and this and that. But yes, that there's been an effort to get that data.
Well, I think just a quick follow-up. I think that's really critical. I mean, in the big picture, I don't think it's the most critical piece of information, frankly, but politically, I think it's very critical because it is the word on the street all the time. Well, every time Corvallis does something, we just bring in other people. And to have some data that would demonstrate that Corvallis people are all over and other people that we're talking about a state region where people move around would be, I think, really excellent.
Yes, that's in there, and we will do our best to present that. And I don't know, again, on that particular field, how frequently the question was actually answered and how in that. So we don't have the data quality on that yet, but we will have some information on it.
Thanks, Melissa. I saw Barbara and then Melissa Isavorin.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Melissa and Mark, for coming to our meeting today and presenting this information. Melissa, you had said that there was some members of the homeless community that were beyond permanent supported housing. And that raised a couple questions for me. How many would you say are in this group? And then what was the criteria that?
Oh, well, so maybe that was a casual way to describe people who need assisted living and people who can't be served by what we have to offer due to the level of illness.
Okay, so it's a medical reason then.
Exactly. So that's something
also mental health?
Oh, certainly. Yep. Certainly. All those types of reasons that we have some really acutely ill people and more of them. So the exact number, I don't know. But I also think it would be very interesting for you guys to have Maddie Bean come to your meeting someday. But yeah, so that's that. So yes, that was a casual way of saying it in, maybe an insider baseball talk,
Okay,
beyond,
thank you.
yeah, permanent supportive housing. Yep.
Melissa Zavorin and then Catherine.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the IHN is working with the counties and the hospital on doing its a regional health assessment. It's done every 3 to 5 years. And so at this point, we are starting to gather data from so many different data sources. And I know housing and homelessness is one of those categories. So to the extent that folks have specific data asks, I think it would be nice for us to consider what we can help support. Also, we'll be doing a robust survey for individuals. So not only IHN members, but all individuals in the community, and that'll be pushed broadly. We'll also be working with our community partners on trying to field those surveys and get a good response rate. So a number of different strategies there. So if there's anything that's complementary or that we can ask again, that could definitely be considered by the group of folks putting that together. And I think it's really helpful to have this information. So I appreciate being here to hear you.
Thank you, Melissa. And I want to connect with you after the meeting too, because we did a lot of in-person survey work with the H.O.P.E community engagement and utilized incentives like socks and batteries and gloves that were supplied by funding from CSC to really incentivize filling out the survey. So I will follow up with you on what was successful and what was less successful after
Super
the meeting.
helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Catherine, go for it.
First, thank you for the presentation on the PIT count, both Dr. Edwards and Melissa. I appreciate the information you're bringing back to this group. I just want to point out a resource that I had come across 2 years ago in Marion County. I don't know if this has ever been talked about here, but it appeared to be very successful. They had a resources outreach dinner type event that went on for the entire day, and it was right in that time of the PIT count, and it was to encourage folks to participate. In that, it wasn't required, but it was to encourage participation, to kind of bring people to a central location to help facilitate that count. And it offered, basic services like haircuts, and they had dinner that was served and breakfast that was served. So 2 different meals. There were clothing that was made available. And then several community resources had tabled around the gymnasium of this space as well. So it was kind of an open community event, but it really supported that PIT count and also provided some nice resources at a cold time of year for some folks that are experiencing houselessness. So if that's something that maybe had been considered here or not, or something that might have value here, I just wanted to put a light on it.
Thank you so much. And yes, everything got Omicron this year. In Albany, there's the Heart Board meeting, and we do the same thing there. And that was canceled and turned into a vaccine event. And so there was no supportive tabling and all that you described. So we do, even though it seems like a million years ago, we did get totally Omicron during the PIT. I know you wanted to volunteer, Catherine, and I couldn't place you. There was a whole bunch of things that just didn't happen. So, but yes, those events, we, assuming that we all get behind this or move on from this pandemic and get to plan differently next year, then things like that have been considered. So thanks. Yes, those incentives are important.
Melissa.
Yeah,
it sounds like a mixture of Stone Soup with the resource fair, with the PIT count, all in one location to try to incentivize folks.
Yes, Stone Soup is a data light type of place, and so they're not fans of that, and I fully respect it. But the meals and that we would make something like that happen. Yeah. So I'm happy to take more questions today or another day, and this is the last you've heard of us. Mark and I still have to figure out what really happened and create some numbers that we can stand behind.
And I think it'd be great, you know, Mark, once you are at a place where you have some conclusions about whether or not the sampling was effective, to invite you both back to give an update on this. That would be wonderful.
Thank
That
you.
sounds good. We'll,
Yep.
we'll let you know when we've got some.
Yes, also, we learned yesterday in our meeting with the DC guy about, so Counting Us app was really good and it has GPS and some other features, but the actual operationalizing of the sampling piece was painfully bad and not fully supportive. But hey, it's a new technology, we all get it, and everyone's doing the pick count on the same day. And at the end of the day, they're a business with customers. So we're just a customer. Anyway, there are other options than Counting Us. Some of them are free, and the gentleman said that we could maybe get them through counties. So I'm going to follow up with you on that, Julie. Because where I'm going with is I feel like we needed much more control over the sampling map. And we didn't have it. So I'd like to see it all in Mark's shop pretty much for the whole rock. But we'll see if we can make that happen.
Well, thank you. Are there any other questions from our board members? You know, for our new board members who are here for the first time and might be hearing about the point in time count for the first time, was all of this new information? Have you heard about the point in time count before? Or was this sort of your first interaction with it? Sorry to put our new board members on the spot, but I know that previous board members have heard about this before. Cade, you're saying they had not heard of it before. Okay.
Yeah, I've heard about it before, but only in offshoot groups from this board, so.
Oh, well, I'm happy to give tutorials and have little side chats if you want to hear. And there's a particular report I like and such, so I'm happy to educate further and say more if anyone's interested.
And Bria also saying in the chat, I hadn't heard of it, but I would love to know more.
Oh, great. Okay, yeah, we can do side chats. Yep.
I'm just more interested in sort of the general community awareness of folks who might not be involved on an advisory board like this. Chanel and Ari?
Yeah, I hadn't heard of it before this time either.
No, I put it in the chat. I hadn't heard of it either.
Okay, yeah, just sort of speaking to the general need of communication on this topic in general. And that'll be a segue into the next topic that you discuss as a board. So thank you to Mark and Melissa for being here. Did you have any questions for our board members? Mark, I think this is the first time you're joining the Hope Advisory Board meeting.
No questions, but I'm glad to meet you all and keep up the good work. This is important work.
Thanks. Thank you, Melissa, for making time again to be a part of the Hope meeting and to share all this great information.
You're very welcome. And thank you for letting me reschedule. I was supposed to come last month, but I would have been so angry. It would have been really not good.
It was the actual day.
It
of
was the
pit
actual
count.
pit day.
It's a good thing we rescheduled.
Yeah, it was pretty salty. It was rough. Okay, well, thanks everyone.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And Melissa and Mark, I don't know if you want to do this, but I invite you to put your emails in the chat if you would
certainly.
like any follow-up questions from board members afterward, if they think of any.
Yes, happy to.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mark,
Okay.
I'll put yours in. I know you have to go.
Okay, and once again, just so you can see who was presenting today, our two guest speakers, and thanking them for their time. Okay, so I'm going to pretty briefly touch upon the equity lens, mainly because it's a much longer document that Dr. Aguilar put together for us that I emailed out to all board members last week. but just wanting to make sure that we re-engage with it and that you all are thinking of the questions that are part of the equity lens as you go forward. And Dr. Aguilar did a lot of great work with this board over a 6-month period of time a year ago, doing trainings on the racial history of Oregon, on what authentic community engagement looks like, self-assessments for all of the board members at the time, a workshop on policy making, and then putting together an equity lens for this board, which really is questions to ask yourselves and a process to engage in. And so Dr. Aguilar took from quite a few different tools to come up with a specific equity lens for this board, and really just to ask yourselves questions as you make decisions, to look at your work from different perspectives, and to think about the inequities and the barriers to access and differential outcomes that people have. Applying an equity lens means paying real disciplined attention to race, ethnicity, and other markers of identity and the intersectionality of those when analyzing data and making recommendations. And some basic assumptions at the start of the equity lens, and these were fleshed out with some of the different trainings that Dr. Aguilar did for the board, is that historical and structural racism has resulted in a lot of the data that we see, the overrepresentation of Black and Native American people experiencing homelessness in our county and in Oregon. That homelessness has many upstream factors, persistent racial discrimination and access to housing, employment, physical and mental health care, education, and overcriminalization in communities of color. And a third basic assumption: to address homelessness, we must assist those in need immediately and do the work to address the underlying causes that continue to contribute to this systemic issue, and advocating for funding that supports crises and prevention strategies, particularly for our Black and Native American communities. Let me move some stuff around on my screen so I can read. So these were some of the equity questions to ask yourselves as you do this work, and that we can all ask ourselves in this community. And underneath each of these 4 questions are quite a few follow-up questions to really flesh this out. And that's in the equity lens tool that I shared with you all last week. Are we engaging in long-term personal and organizational growth and education around equity issues? There are quite a few different ways to engage in that personal and organizational growth, with recruiting and with hiring. Are we meaningfully engaging Black, Native, and other voices of marginalized folks with lived expertise of homelessness in our efforts to make recommendations on developing programs, public policy, research, and redesigning how our crisis response systems work? Are we conducting formal or informal equity assessments to minimize any potential unintended harm on historically disinvested communities for every proposed project or program? We might not have answers to all of these, but continuing to ask them is part of the equity lens. How can we best set up our recommendations to be achievable and sustainable? And what mechanisms need to be in place to ensure successful implementation? And I think you all did a good job of addressing this last one in your precursor recommendations that came before your 12 policy recommendations, which was really, there have to be staff to work on this, and there has to be funding that's pursued for it and legislative advocacy for it. And that's sort of where we are right now at the city and the county. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing to see if there are any questions or comments about the Equity Lens tool that I sent out last week, just to make sure you have a moment to pause and think about that. I see it throughout your previous recommendations and the foundational recommendations. Carol, go for it. You're muted, Carol. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Could you go to the first slide, please?
Absolutely. Give me just a sec. This one, what's an equity lens?
Then go to the next one, I think then. It was, no, this was maybe, were there some before this? It was the authentic community engagement. I think that's really key. And I believe that was the one where she talked about what we bring to the table when we're having a conversation and how hard it is to get past our own particular worldview. And I think I think some of the other ones are really difficult, but this one, I think we just need to poke ourselves over and over again, because it's, coming from many of us from middle-class families or living a middle-class life, it's hard to not have those judgmental things in the back of our mind when we're talking about homeless issues. And so I just wanted to remind ourselves that she talked my recollection is, I may be making this up, but my recollection is she talked quite a bit about that. Is that the one where she had the slide where there were three people trying to reach a vase, and one was tall and one was little and one was medium, and the people kept saying, well, we'll just help the little one, we'll lift her up. And then finally somebody said, well, bring the whole vase down. I don't know if that's that one, but I thought that was a pretty powerful message of trying to remember there's many ways to solve a problem, and sometimes thinking that enabling somebody to do something might not be the best way.
Yeah, I think it was more, why don't we just move the fence out of the way for everyone?
Yeah,
The fence that's in front of folks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Carol. Jan.
If you go back to the slide that Carol referenced, authentic community engagement, right? I was going to say that the presentation that Brad Smith did I think it was last month, was so profound in terms of what he was able to present. I think was that, who the homeless, or what the homeless population we have really consists of, especially disabled, elderly, Native American women. It was digging down, it was going layer by layer down into the onion, and not just what people perceive to be homelessness. And in broad community wise, I think that people don't really understand the complexity of what homelessness involves. And I know it's from an equity lens, I think one of the biggest issues is disabilities. And I've seen that it's not just race or ethnicity.
That's that intersectionality piece of it can be many different things for one person, and many different systems in play as well. All right, any other thoughts or questions about this before we move on to your discussion? Before we dive into the discussion, I'd love everybody to take about a 3-minute break to stand or stretch or bio breaks. So let's meet back at 4:58 to dive into the meaty discussion for the rest of your meeting. Thanks. Hey, Kaylee, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you. Have you introduce yourself after we reconvene the meeting? I just wanted to make sure you're ready for that. Okay, good. Bria, thank you. I'm glad you're still there. It is totally fine to keep your video off when you're having internet issues. It happens to all of us. Okay, it is 4:58. Love to reconvene your meeting for you and start off with a little bit of an update about staff capacity, because one of the precursor foundational recommendations that you made as part and before your 12 policy recommendations was that the city and the county need organizational capacity to work on and implement your 12 recommendations. And I'm very happy to report that we're recruiting for 2 openings with the county. One is for a project manager to manage the portfolio of different projects involved in the 12 HOPE recommendations, starting with emergency sheltering. And the second open recruitment is for a grant researcher, grant writer to go for and have the capacity to apply for and distribute funding that aligns with all the different projects in the HOPE recommendations. And then the third staff person that I'm happy to report is Kaylee Olson, who's with us tonight. And Kaylee, I'll let you introduce yourself and explain your role a bit and how it will be involved with some of the HOPE work.
Sure. Thanks so much, Julie. Hello, everybody. It's so nice to be here with you today, virtually. I'm Kaylee Olson, and I recently was promoted within the health department to communications coordinator. And a large part of my time as communications coordinator will not only support health department communications in general, but will also support some of the work that the HOPE board is doing and what Julie is doing, as well as our staff within the city and county to advance this work to address homelessness in Benton County. And so part of my role will be to help facilitate communications about what the HOPE board is doing and what our city and county teams are doing. And so, I've kind of dabbled a little bit in this arena just in my previous roles in the health department. I worked as an administrative specialist in both our community health center as well as our health department under Suzanne Hoffman. And so I've been able to touch this work a little bit by doing things such as taking notes and minutes in some of the internal city and county meetings as they discuss how to move this work forward. But I will continue familiarizing myself with this work. Again, I think Julie mentioned, I also did some updates to the HOPE website. And so every time you have agendas or minutes for this meeting, that's something that I was posting up there. So tracking it a little, but I'm really excited to delve more into this work that y'all are doing and to be able to, communicate with you and hear from you what your feedback is on how best to communicate out the wonderful work that everyone's doing. And so I look forward to just continuing to dialogue with you all. I'm open to, having communications with you and hearing what you have to say. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll put my information in the chat so that you guys can have my email and contact information.
Don't do it, Kaylee. I'm kidding. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, and Julie's gonna, play a big role too, and as she already has in facilitating that, and so she'll bring to me recommendations that y'all come up with in your work at these board meetings. I won't necessarily be able to participate in every single one. Like I mentioned, I am doing work for the entire health department, which is quite large, and we've got lots of programs and projects going. So I'm definitely going to be looking to Julie to take what you guys decide and work on, and your recommendations, bring that feedback to me in sort of a funneled way so that I can prioritize the most important and time-sensitive materials to be able to facilitate those communications.
Thank you, Kaylee. I'm so glad half of Kaylee's position will be supporting this work. And then with a project manager and a grant researcher writer and myself as facilitator and convener, we will have the makings in the beginning of a small team to work on implementation of your recommendations. Carol, go for it.
Well, one of the things I noted, Paul Bellata sent out, I chair the housing committee for the league, and he sent out a update on things that the city was doing. And what he did was, and maybe he copied you, but what he did is he noted which ones were HOPE recommendations. And it was a really powerful thing, because sometimes people say, well, the HOPE board isn't doing anything except gathering data. And I said, well, that's what we're about. We don't make things happen. We're a board. So I think when we think about communication in terms of what comes out of city council and what comes out of the county, when they are doing certain things that have to do with the HOPE recommendations, it would be really helpful if they said, we're hiring this person in response to HOPE recommendation, just to get it over and over again that the work we're doing is translating into actions. And I think that would help a lot.
And that really is why I'm so grateful to have Kaylee here, because with her expertise in graphic design, putting together newsletters, doing social media posts, all of the work that she has done previously with the county, we will finally have the staff capacity to be able to communicate some of that. Yeah, and Carol, just on your note about Paul's email, this was an email sent to City Council with an update about the work that city and county and provider partners and staff are doing. So I will forward it to the whole HOPE board first thing tomorrow morning, so that you know what we're talking about here, but it really is an update on all of this work. And that's the kind of work that Kaylee is going to be helping to package up to communicate out to everybody in the community. George, go for it.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to follow up on something that Carol said earlier, and it's exciting for me to see Kaylee here, because what Carol was talking about and what she does in working with the league and hearing what people say about homelessness, there's a narrative that's out there in the world about why people are homeless and what they're after, and like people are getting something for nothing. What I see this board doing, it's probably we should talk about this in the next topic, but what Kaylee offers is the opportunity for us to work to change the narrative. What's the real story about people? Because we all know what that story is, and there's multiple stories out there, but even just what we do is an example of a community working really hard to be able to try to solve some of these really difficult problems, and we're having some success doing it. People ought to hear that. That's what we have an opportunity to do, is to tell that story, and that's a role for this board, I think.
Thanks, George. Well, that really leads into the second part of your meeting, which is a discussion about your role. And Jan, before I get to you, I'm just going to screen share so that we can kind of frame the conversation a little bit. So you have had a conversation as a board, I think it's your October and November and your January meeting, to kind of chew on the idea of what role does this board play going forward to support implementation of your recommendations. And the two that have risen to the top are really this evaluation and communication role. How do we look at what the gaps are that are still remaining in our system, and the work being done to fill those gaps that takes quite a long time to do that work, and communicate out what's happening to address the gaps, what are the ones that are still remaining. So setting aside some time at each meeting, maybe going forward, or having a work group look at this and bring it back to the full board of, what are we hearing? What misinformation might we be hearing? What have we heard nothing about? Or, is the PIT count brand new information to some folks? And what does that look like given your meetings? And then the second topic, researching best practices on successful systems that correspond to your recommendations and are timely and relevant to the work being done by city, county, and provider partners on emergency sheltering and coordinated entry. So we can start with the discussion of this first one, this evaluation and communication role. And it's perfect because Kaylee's here right now as well. What would that look like to you all? Would you like to have some time at each board meeting set aside to talk about, what are the communication needs this month? What are people hearing? What are you hearing at City Council or with the League of Women Voters or at NAACP meetings or on campus with OSU students, and putting together some ideas on what is timely as far as the communication needs? Any thoughts on this one? Jan, you had raised your hand. Yeah, go for it.
Right. I just wanted to second what George had said earlier, but in terms of what we need to communicate, I think execution, what we have executed, you know, we're systematic problem solving here, systematically, hopefully. And as opposed to, I guess you could call it a shotgun approach. I think that needs to be clearly communicated to our taxpayers and folks that are concerned that the problem's getting worse or it's not being addressed properly. But that we are looking at this systematically in a problem solving focus. And, you know, it's very broad actually, but it turns out that from a managerial point of view, this is how you solve the problems. And I think that communication needs to be done. It includes how much money's been spent, what the projects have been, what the results have been, and so on and so forth. So some data and looking forward, looking backward, that sort of thing. I think Kaylee's gonna have her job cut out. She's gonna have a lot to do.
Well, and that's also where she's one person and this will be half of her full-time job. And so it's not all going to happen overnight and it's not going to be everything all at once. But we are going to have some staff support to communicate out on a more routine, regular basis. But that will all go through Suzanne Hoffman with the health department. So feel free to share your thoughts, but it will really be Suzanne who dictates the work product that Kaylee does. George, before I go to you, I saw Charles put something in the chat of, I think that's a good idea. And Charles, what do you think is a good idea? Can you chime in on that? And Charles, if you're trying to speak,
Sorry,
you're muted. Go for it.
I had to run out real quick for something. And I also didn't want to talk much today. I had a tooth pulled this morning.
Oh boy.
Just on what you were saying about, you know, trying to get short updates.
I lost you, Charles. I think your connection might not be the best. So we will circle back to you once you get to a place where you have a better connection. But I think I heard you say brief updates at each meeting with some feedback about what needs to be communicated on them. But George, we'll go to you. Go for it.
Thanks. I was just going to follow up on what Jen was saying. Is there are a lot of different stories to tell. The question that I was going to say is, it takes people to make that happen, and you and Kaylee are the people that actually make the physical things happen. So part of what we need to figure out is, how is this tool available to us, and what format is it available to us? What I think is this sounds like territory for a work group to me. That's where people that are interested in it can get together, or we could talk about it. You know, we could talk about it as an agenda item with the whole board about what is it that we want to communicate about what we're trying to do, and what are we trying to get across to the public. That provides a whole range of opportunities, but how we have that discussion depends on what you guys are able to deliver in terms of product. And so until we know what the options are for products, it's tough to say what's the discussion. You know, how do we communicate? Who do we communicate it with?
That's a good point, George. And I think your feedback here, Kaylee and I will take back to our internal work group with city and county staff to say, you know, what does that look like? And does Julie package up some of the feedback from a work group and the full board and take it over to Kaylee and the city and county staff and it gets incorporated? Is it a newsletter? Does that come out quarterly or every other month? What does that look like? So it's still evolving, and Kaylee's position is brand new. She started this month. So I think this is more of a conversation and an evolution and a back and forth, and this is part of that process.
Yeah, if I could just add to that for a second, I agree with that 100%. What we do have though is we have elected officials that are on this board, and they go back and talk to the folks at the elected official level. And really what we're saying is we just really have an opportunity to communicate some positive work that's happening, and that may require a little bit of a budget somewhere along the line to be able to allow, you know, and they get to have a talk about how would they like to communicate that, because we have a good story to tell that'll help them. That's you know, and so how do they want to do that?
Thank you, George. Before I go on to Catherine, Kaylee, did you want to chime in on any of this at any point? Please feel free to do so.
No, thanks. I think you captured it accurately, and I appreciate your feedback, everyone. We'll continue to, hear these ideas and filter them through some best practice lenses that we have through the communications team in the health department. And you had mentioned options, George. Like Julie's saying, the newsletter is something that's being discussed as a potential option. We do have a social media presence. We have a Facebook page, so there will likely be information to come through that. Historically, we've done, press releases and things like that. So definitely we'll keep working with Julie to communicate with you all what those options are. And Julie will continue bringing that feedback to us. And we'll hope to move some of this forward. So thanks.
Thanks, Kaylee. And I think what I'd love from your discussion here is more, what does that look like? And it sounds like maybe a work group is an idea that George is throwing out, like a smaller group of folks on this board who are really interested in the communications topic and might be able to get down more to the nitty gritty on this and bring it back to the full board as an agenda item. That's been thrown out there. Catherine, go for it.
Well, this is a great topic and a long time coming. I remember when we sat at the tables down there at the City Hall chambers and we had all those papers laying all over, and communications was part of that conversation of priorities over time. So exciting that we're getting to this place, and glad to have you on board, Kaylee. I also know that our recommendations included this communications piece as well. So it's definitely exciting to be at this time. I would definitely support the idea of a work group. I think that's a good way to kind of galvanize the direction that we'd like to see, with some recommendations we could bring back to the board and see how we can maximize this communication. And I think it's important that as we look forward and what our communication could look like, that HOPE doesn't stand alone. And I know that sometimes we feel like we're taking sometimes that front hit of the conversations about what's not being done, or it's not being done enough, or how come things aren't changing. The reality is we have a lot of partners that we work with, and I think it's important to illustrate that it is a group effort moving forward. So it's our elected officials and policymakers. It's the HOPE Advisory Board serving in that advising capacity, but it's also our community partners that make all this work happen. And I think telling those stories from multiple aspects, and especially the community work that's actually being achieved, will really help people understand what we're doing right now, what the future is moving forward, and what our options might look like for this next couple of years of this board to help facilitate that. So glad to be here at this space. External fix.
Catherine, you broke up just a little bit for me at the end, but I'm also letting Bria know that yes, folks are talking. Bria, how's your connection? Can you hear me? All right, well, hopefully her connection improves. Some of our newer board members, I'd love to hear your thoughts, if you have any, at this point on how best to utilize this board meeting, or perhaps a work group, which would be a smaller set, like a handful of folks who have the time and the interest on this topic, meeting separately with myself and Kaylee. To talk about this. Do you have any thoughts about the communication needs and how this board can inform them? You have fresh eyes, so it's exciting to hear your perspectives. Yeah, Ari, go for it.
Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent idea to have a smaller group of people to focus on this and keep it at the forefront, because I do believe that it's very important to get future initiatives and money and dollars to have these stories out there and have people see what's actually going on, and there's progress being made, but also get to see kind of more of the different faces of people who are not housed, and how we might do that, and kind of brainstorm ideas about what that might look like. For example, like, do we have people who are homeless who be willing to be interviewed and photographed and kind of tell their stories from different different homeless communities, and put that out there? That's one way to get a face on homelessness. And this is just one kind of many ideas we could brainstorm about, like, could we do this? Is this a good thing? What do some ideas, newsletter, social media, all that kind of stuff, but to like kind of flesh these ideas out. So we have them to give to Kaylee and say, hey, is this workable for you? Like how could this happen? Would you need support around it? What would that look like? You know, just kind of things like that. Those are thoughts right off the top of my head, and thinking that it would probably be a good idea to have a work group to kind of focus it a little bit and have some, you know, interplay between Kaylee and the board, kind of, so we're all kind of visioning kind of the same thing and what is possible, rather than visioning it and thinking it's possible and it's not possible. So it kind of will put us all on the same page. So.
Thank you for those ideas, Ari. Melissa Isavora, and I see your hands up.
Yeah, just to provide some input. Some of us are super busy. Maybe there are a few lucky folks that aren't as busy. But, you know, there might be some creative ways to get at, you know, ensuring we have time to brainstorm. I have thoughts on every single one of the recommendations. So, but I also, I know that if we brainstorm at each meeting, we don't have the entire year to do these things. We need to make some progress sooner rather than later. So it might be that it's an invite to a brainstorming session, and those that can attend, they attend, and then the recommendations are brought back, or maybe specific questions are asked ahead of time, ahead of the brainstorming session, where it's what are your thoughts on this particular recommendation. Then the brainstorming session occurs, and it can incorporate that feedback, and then it's brought back to this group. So you know, a couple of brainstorming sessions and a couple of recommendations in between the board meetings. And so maybe there's something creative like that we can get input sooner rather than later and get moving.
Thanks for your thoughts, Melissa. Chanel.
One of the things that came to my mind when discussing the communications piece was, I know that we are focused on sharing what we're doing as a board to those in the city and the county, allowing them to understand that progress and movement has been made, and understanding what our position is. But I'm also wondering too, if we, and if so, how are we communicating our progress to those who are experiencing homelessness? I think that is something that's vital, especially when you think about, I mean, I just think about my positionality as a Black woman, and having other people doing things on my behalf is great, but also one, not being a part of those discussions or not having insight into what's happening around me and how it's impacting me, I think is really vital. So just thinking about when we talk about communication, not only to those city and county officials and those in those roles, but how are we communicating that to those who we're supposed to be supporting and helping? I think that's really vital.
Yeah, thank you, Chanel. I think that's really good insight too. And I think key partnerships with folks who are interacting with folks still experiencing homelessness or needing services. And Andrea, I'm looking at you, and I am hoping you're paying attention. Andrea, you know, she's the executive director of Corvallis Housing First, and being able to make sure that whatever content we come up with Kaylee, like a newsletter, that we do some printing of it. You know, print up actual copies and take them down to Corvallis Housing First and the Daytime Drop-In Center, and the men's and women's shelter and COI and Jackson Street, and using a variety of different communication methods so that it's not just social media, not just email lists. Am I capturing that correct, Chanel?
Yeah. And I was going to say, like, as you were talking about that, I know that, you know, sometimes as a therapist, when I'm talking or speaking to people in the community, there might be a lot of jargon that I use that might not be as accessible. So understanding like our language that we're communicating and how we're communicating, I think is important as well, just being able to have it accessible to everyone. But yeah, I think you're on point.
They were your points. So thank you for them. Well, and that's also where like Kaylee has done a lot of trainings with the health department on what we call health literacy principles. And Kaylee, is this what you were going to talk about? Sorry, George, I know you raised your hand, but I'm going to go to Kaylee first so she can touch upon this.
Just to respond, yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so thank you so much, Chanel, for bringing those points up. I really appreciate you making sure that we're looking through that lens. And to Julie's point, she was just mentioning some of the health literacy trainings to make sure that those, we're not being so jargon focused and we're bringing it down to a level that most people can understand. Additionally, some of those methods, another experience that I've had through the health department is working to figure out alternative methods of communication to reach populations that we're not usually reaching through our standard methods of communication, like the email, like social media. And so, Julie mentioned printing out that newsletter. That could be a great resource. Flyers, we've done print materials. Additionally, another way that we've learned to reach folks in communities that we're not typically reaching is, through our community partners, like Julie mentioned, Corvallis Housing First, having that touch with our homeless community can, as long as we're sustaining those community partnerships and sharing with them and communicating with them the information that needs to be shared, we're hoping that that can sort of be passed down by a trusted source. And additionally, like basically town criers, folks that are trusted within a community to spread a message from a source that may not be as trusted within that community. We recognize that not everyone trusts city, county, government, health department, but there are some resources in the community that folks do trust. And so we want to get that word to those key players so that they could communicate to the people who trust them. So yeah, so thank you for bringing that up, and I'll be continuing to work on these alternative methods and strategies to make sure that we're communicating to a wide audience and not just people who use email. So thanks.
Thanks for chiming in, Kaylee. You said it better than I did. George, go for it.
Yeah, I kind of think that Kaylee might have just made my point. For me, but yeah, that was it. What this discussion has been really good. And it's been good because of exactly what Kaylee just said, is that it brought to my attention the fact that I wasn't thinking about this with all of the perspectives that were available to it, and particularly from the standpoint of who's the audience. And so we don't necessarily look at Julie, you or Kaylee, because your staff here are the only two resources that are available to this committee. There's all the people sitting around this table, plus all of the connections that they have into the network that's working to solve this. And so part of what we can do here, and that's where the work groups, brainstorming session doesn't matter. I mean, we just need to get together, put ideas down and say, how do we tug on those strings? How do we get messages out to those different groups, just to make sure that, everybody understands that, we're doing something, we're trying to make a difference. People are working on this. Good things are happening.
Thanks, George. Are there other thoughts from board members on this topic? I'm hearing some interest in a work group for folks who have the time and capacity and interest to meet. It would be meeting with myself and Kaylee to talk about thoughts on how this board could utilize its forum in a monthly meeting, and also thoughts that you have as individual board members on communication strategies or what to prioritize communicating out. Are there board members who would be interested in having a virtual meeting with me and Kaylee that we would schedule based on everybody's availability? Ari? Great.
Yeah, I brought it up, so I kind of think I ought to be in.
Okay, so I'm hearing George, Ari, Nancy, did I see you chiming in? Nancy Wise and Jan, are you interested in that work group? Okay, is there anybody I forgot? I have George, Ari, Nancy, and Jan. Catherine, you're interested?
I'd be interested, thanks.
Okay, and there are other things that Kaylee is already diving in, working on. like how to repackage the recommendations themselves, different summaries of work and progress in the community that I have done and Brigida has done and Paul has done. So work is going to start very quickly, but I think this is sort of an ongoing process. And so even if this group of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you can't meet immediately, because I know what scheduling is like, it will still be useful to have this brainstorming and to bring it back to the greater board. Okay, well, thank you. Let me see if we've missed anything in the chat here because I was so busy listening. Bria, you're saying the library would be a good place to communicate to those we serve since they often use that resource. That is definitely true. Carol, did you want to chime in?
I thought what Melissa said, I think maybe, I'm not sure if I understood her correctly, but she'll correct me if I didn't, was that if somebody didn't say, I'm interested in the concept, but I also think it's good to let other voices be heard. So we would just send, if we have some concerns, we would send them to you and you would forward them to the, because I thought what Melissa said, we could do a brainstorming about what we all thought should be done. And that information then would go to the communication group to work it out. But I might have made that up.
Well, this is part of that brainstorming. And I think also as the work group meets, maybe it becomes apparent that a portion of your next meeting needs to be devoted to this topic for brainstorming as well.
Yeah, that would be good because there's, you know, a topic comes up today, you brainstorm, and then 2 days later you go, oh, wow, we really should have blah, 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 blah. Okay, thank you.
I was going to clarify because I was thinking if you set up like a series of brainstorming sessions on each one of the recommendations, like prior to that is if anybody wants to but can't attend the brainstorming session, send your thoughts our way, and then that input can be considered in that brainstorming session. And so that we're not losing anyone just because, you know, we're all busy and can't attend a meeting. And then when that information is, you know, final recommendations or whatever, draft recommendations are brought back then to the board. That way, all of this stuff can kind of happen simultaneously and it doesn't depend on everyone being available, but you have that opportunity for input.
That's a great point, Melissa. Thank you for clarifying that. There's also another factor of we're not able to work on all 12 of the recommendations yet. You know, we still just have me. We've got 2 open recruitments and then half of Kaylee's time on communications. But there's some progress being made on a handful of the 12 recommendations. So there isn't really even a need to do a brainstorming session on all 12. It's sort of like 3 or 4 where there's some action happening right now because of staff capacity and progress and funding. So narrowing it to those, but I like that idea. And Kaylee and I can huddle up and see what might be possible. Barbara.
Yes, thank you. Communication is definitely important. The other part of that recommendation is evaluation, and that needs data. And I'm going to speak for Peggy, who sent out an email, responded to an email that you had sent out, Julie, with regards to how the data is managed and where the data is going and how many times we have to move the same package of data from place to place. We mentioned this, or I mentioned this in the last meeting as, you know, as a brainstorming idea that we should be thinking about in the short term and the long term, where we need to communicate so that we can possibly get our arms around why we have to move that data or put that data in so many different places. And is there an opportunity for us to streamline that process? I think, again, speaking for Peggy, when we were all together, I remember her saying it could free up one of her FTEs to do actual social work if she, you know, wasn't having to put data into all these different systems. So I just wanted to share that, excuse me. as the other part of that recommendation is evaluation.
Julie, I think I could speak to that on the communications level a little at least. Thank you, Barbara, for bringing that up. And part of some of the communications work I've done with Benton County thus far has really been data-driven communication. So using analytics tools for our social media, for our email communications, things like that to measure the success rate. And that way we can assess our return on investment. And so that we're making sure not to waste time using communications that aren't successful, but rather focus on those communications that are proving to be the most engaging for folks, the most useful, the most viewed, seen, visited, shared, that kind of information. So hopefully that helps address at least part of that point as far as communications and data linkages.
Thanks, Kaylee and Barbara. Melissa.
Sorry, I keep chiming in. I always have a lot to say. So one of the things that IHN is doing is we have just kicked off the Intercommunity Health Research Institute. And the idea of that is to really provide some evidence-based research around things that are happening in our region and effective solutions, or what solutions have been tried and what are the outcomes to that. And the whole reason behind that is so that we get that evidence-based evaluation to support what we need to throw money at or resources at in the future. And so what we evaluate can be a number of different things. It could be, evaluating the lack of data or what data exists and doesn't exist. It could be what supports exists and what doesn't exist. And we're starting out small this year, but certainly can do, something in the realm of housing. And it really is to support population health and health equity, that whole some social determinants of health. And so that might be an opportunity for us to really think about, can we support something like that through that institute? And it does include like OSU, so putting some academic rigor behind it, biostatisticians, epidemiologists, and whatnot that have their hands in data all across our region. So just kind of throwing that out there.
Well, and Melissa, that's a great segue to the other topic and the other role that this board can play going forward, not just the communication piece, but doing some research on emerging best practices or evidence-based practices that align with the H.O.P.E recommendations that city and county staff and provider partners are working to implement right now. And so if it's all right with you all, I'd love to segue to that topic to talk about how this H.O.P.E board, given the role that you have and that you meet once a month and with maybe a work group meeting on this topic, can do some research to help support implementation, really starting with that emergency sheltering. Because that is the priority recommendation for the city and county elected officials. And so there's H.O.P.E recommendation 6, emergency sheltering, but also your first recommendation, number 1, on data improvements, and your 4th recommendation on we need more people whose paid job it is to work in sheltering and case management in order to do any more sheltering, starting with researching some of the best practices on that topic. And I'll give you an example that we're grappling with as city and county staff and provider staff and CSC. It's coordinated entry. So having coordinated data entry across our system of homeless service providers and having data be high quality and across the board, but then also the process of coordinating entry of individuals into our homelessness system of services based on a coordinated data entry list. And those are 2 different concepts. One is just the actual data getting entered itself and having it done in a coordinated way. And the other one is coordinating the entry of a person by taking them from the top of that data entry list and saying, these are our available bed spaces. And that's really a longer process that's going to take some time to adopt and implement. And what do you think about having this board research some best practices or evidence-based practices that align with your HOPE recommendations? Oh boy, it was all at the same time. But I think Jim and then Barbara and then George.
I've been thinking a lot about this particular one for recently. And I have a pitch I want to make to everybody. Because some of you know how long-winded I can be and how much I can ramble. I actually wrote this down ahead of time so that I could be as clear as possible without getting off course the way I tend to. And what I'm about to say is, I think a somewhat different interpretation on researching best practices that might fit with what Julie just summarized, or it might be suggesting that we go beyond the boundaries of that. So let me just do my piece. It's going to take about 2 minutes and then I'll be done. So forgive me if this is a little bit of a speech, but that's what it is. Housing in our community and in communities up and down the West Coast is in short supply and expensive. For a very long time now, housing costs have increased far more than income, especially the incomes of people living in poverty. And we see the results every day, people sleeping in doorways, tents, shelters, cars, and campers. And those are only the ones we can see. Homelessness happens when vulnerable populations collide with broken systems. It doesn't have to be that way. Unfortunately, we've gotten used to saying that homelessness is complex and intractable, and we don't really question that belief. And the results are predictable. Homelessness remains complex and intractable. And so we focus our efforts on managing the problem and mitigating its harm. But the truth, from my point of view, is that homelessness is a problem that can be solved. Communities all over the country are doing it, and these communities all have something in common. They all did something essential, ambitious, and yet very, very simple. They decided as a community to align their efforts and resources to end, not only manage, homelessness. To be clear, I know we often say that everyone in Benton County should have the opportunity to live in decent, safe, and affordable housing. That vision statement is important, and it's included in the recommendations the HOPE board made last year. But describing what the world should look like is not the same as saying we intend to make it so, that we will end homelessness, and that we have a plan for how to do it. If we do this, I think we'll eventually make some new recommendations that take us beyond a list of needed projects and programs. It will describe what's needed to thoroughly align all our efforts towards a shared goal, a commitment to measuring impact, and a willingness to shift strategies towards those programs that work. And when I say all of us, I mean everyone. Local government, funders, service providers, the healthcare system, the faith community, and others. The HOPE board may be advisory to local government, but system change requires the whole system to change. So this is my request, to decide that we establish another work group and explore what other communities are doing to actually end homelessness. Join them in setting that goal for our community and identify the key strategies for getting there. We can start with a work group devoted to researching and learning about what other communities are doing to look at solutions to homelessness from a systems point of view. Forgive the phrase systems point of view, that's lingo, but it's a shorthand for pointing at a lot of things. And I'll end by saying, I'm suggesting this because there's information out there and I've researched some of it, and I've only, I think, touched the tip of the iceberg. But it goes beyond efforts that I think can be done by local government. It gets to efforts that we have to do together as a community. And I think that is the ambition that's before us and a commitment we need to make.
Thank you, Jim. I'm not going to try to summarize what you said because there was a lot in there, but I did hear you wanting to be a part of a work group to research some best practices for a system to end homelessness. George, did you want to chime in? I see your hand up, and then Carol.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be brief. I agree with Jim. I think a goal to end homelessness is a great thing. And I just want to say that we're in a unique place. We have to remember we're in a unique place because we're at a place that looks at how all of these systems work and what they're doing and where there's success and where there's not. And so what we're talking about today is approaching this big problem in really a systematic way with a plan. We're just describing different components. You know, Jim wants to look at the big picture and say, what's the best practice that we know out there? What are real concrete steps that can be taken to end homelessness? And how are we doing them? Then there's another part of us that are looking at, in the recommendations, that are looking at how in the practical reality of today do we get down to solving the actual problem that's there, and what do we do today? So, I mean, I think all of these things are good recommendations, and I'm just supporting all of them and say let's move forward with it, because that's what this group does. That's what we're here for.
Thank you, George. Carol, go for it.
I was asking, I would like to ask Jim to clarify something, because I think I'm missing something here. So managed housing, when we say we're managing the problem, so that means like we're putting people in shelters as opposed to really providing them with homes. So is that what you mean, Jim? What's the difference between managing and solving? I mean, it sounds simple.
Well, I think an end to homelessness means someone has a permanent, stable place to live, right?
So by managing,
that should be the end point. That
Right.
should be where the whole system works towards. I would add that shelters are an important part of that system. So this is not an either or thing. This doesn't obviate the need for shelters or all kinds of emergency and temporary help. As a matter of fact, it gives more focus to what the shelters do. But there certainly obviously has to be something beyond shelters in order to make that progression. There's an organization, a national organization called Community Solutions, I believe. And they have a sort of a package of recommendations for communities called Built for Zero. And the purpose of what that package does is try to help communities reach functional zero rate of homelessness, which doesn't mean that no one's ever homeless. It means that homelessness continuously becomes something rare and brief. And so certainly shelter systems are an important part to help someone stabilize so they can take the next step. But it shouldn't end there. It's not just a matter of what's best practices about shelters. It's a matter of what's best practices for how a system is designed and how it's functioned and how it functions. It includes giving direction to how money is spent.
Thanks, Jim. I saw in the chat Brian Cotter saying you agree with Jim. Brian, did you want to chime in on what part of that or add to anything?
No, there's nothing really I want to add. I agree with what Jim was saying, that the end solution is what we need to work towards, is the end solution.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Well, Jim has proposed a work group on to do some research on best practices or evidence-based practices on systems that end homelessness. And that includes, best practices for sheltering. I volunteer as tribute. Thank you, Andrea. Okay, I'm hearing Andrea. Jim, I'm going to assume you want to be a part of this work group.
No, I just thought I'd watch.
Okay, great. Jim, Bria, did I see you want to participate in the work group? Yes. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Barbara, are you raising your hand to participate in this work group, or did you just want to chime in?
I wanted to say that this is the kind of stuff that the Opal group, Mark Edwards group, is fabulous at. So I would, whoever is going to be participating in this, I would recommend reaching out to Melissa Egan and Mark Edwards as well.
I used back when I had a job, I used their programs. I know Mark and what they've done, and usually it takes a lot of lead time, but because they're not just available on short notice, but getting the involvement of OSU would be incredible.
Well, and that's also where there might be some synergy with what Melissa was talking about with IHN of their research institute. Because correct me if I'm wrong, Melissa, but they are partnering with OSU to add some real expertise and staff capacity with research.
Right. It's that academic rigor, has the way they evaluate and actually producing papers. They have a broader reach there as well, and communicating too.
Thank you. And Melissa, I know that your schedule probably does not permit participation in this work group, but I would love to at least get some info from you about how to make sure that we are communicating and coordinating with IHN's Research Institute.
Yeah, okay, I can provide you that. And if you have specific questions, you can invite me as optional, and if I can make it work, but I would not depend on my schedule.
No problem. Okay, I saw Andrea and then George.
I just wanted to speak to Jim's idea. I think that, even though it seems like sometimes the issues are so frustrating, like the point in time count discussion, the difficulty of getting our arms wrapped around data, our community is in a unique position that we could actually, if we set some goals and learned a little bit more about how to build for zero, I really feel like we could get there. I mean, we're not in a place where, we have we're talking about thousands and thousands of people. But we have some systems that are definitely broken and that need to be addressed. And I'm super excited about this idea, and I think it's where we need to go. And I think we're finally ready to take on some bigger challenges, especially now that we have H.O.P.E up and running. We've got the recommendations, we've got some really good resources available in our community. And so I'm just excited. So
thank you. I'm glad to hear your excitement. George, go for it.
Well, thanks. I agree with that. It's with what Andrea is saying. We can really, and I think that's what Jim is picking up on too, is in doing this work for a long time, I've never seen the opportunity that exists today and the coming together of the right organizations with a little bit of capacity and the influx of money that's coming into the community. And what we really need to be prepared for is, how do we make the best use of those resources? I mean, we can really do something here. That's, we can make a dent. And like Andrea said, if we want to get to zero, this is the time to make that push, because we won't ever see this. I haven't seen this money in 30 years. Let's get some value out of it. And so that just means keep all going in the right direction. And the data piece is critical. And if we could get if it's OSU that's the place to do that, then part of what this data group in my mind ought to be doing is saying, well, what's the scope of what we need? What do we really need to look at to get to that zero number? Are there key data points that are important for us to know? And how do we keep that going in the right direction so that informs what we do? And so, yeah, I think these are all really critical things.
Thank you, George. For this group to do some research, I saw Andrea, Jim, Bria, and then Melissa Isavoran optional, but I'll work with your assistant to try to find some time in your schedule. Did I miss anyone? Okay, I will do my best. Barbara, what are you saying here? I would like to be involved for Biostats EPI work group. Is that the data improvement group that I'm already convening that you have been a part of?
Yeah, but if I see that there's going to be some synergy between the best practices group, like George just mentioned, there's going to be some synergy with the data. And so after March 7th, I'll have a lot more free time. That's my defense date. So I would like to be involved in that and maybe help be a bridge for that data between the two groups, if I can.
Okay. Yeah, Barbara, I will put you down for the second work group too.
Thanks.
Thank you. Andrea, is your hand still up? Okay, Jim, go for it.
Yeah, one thing I'd add, and this kind of builds on what Melissa was talking about and others. Thinking in terms of how systems work didn't come naturally to me, and it still doesn't always come naturally to me. It's easier to more naturally think of things in a more confined way. But in the last 10 years or so, I've hung out a lot with both people from OSU and people from community health programs, IHN, Samaritan, and Benton County Public Health in particular. And wow, we're just surrounded by people who are well versed at looking at how systems work to produce either poor results or better results for the health of the community. And so I'm really excited about doing some reaching out to people that really kind of know the framework, that even they may not be experts in homelessness, but people who are experts in looking at communities and how we function in a comprehensive way. So I really look forward to doing that and pulling in some of these local resources as well as national ones.
Okay, well, I will do my best to schedule work group meetings sometime in the next 3 weeks so that you can all chew on this in a work group setting and then bring it back to the full board at the March meeting. One update that I think is important, given everything that you're talking about, and Joel, you might be a better person to do it, but just talking about city and county folks moving ahead with the situation table so that we have yet another tool in our toolbox here and doing what we can to understand the timelines for that because it is one of your HOPE recommendations. Do you want to provide that update, Joel?
Yeah, I can share a little bit about that. And at risk of getting the cart too far, the horse too far in front of the cart, or whichever way that saying goes, cart, horse, whatever. We have had some meetings with a variety of key stakeholders that would hopefully move the situation table forward. I know it was one of our recommendations. It's come up in other venues as well. We just met this morning, Julie included, with some folks from that are involved with the training aspect of bringing that to fruition. I think that we have a plan to move that forward. I think that it would be a great benefit to our community, and in addition to accomplishing one of the goals from our recommendations. So hopefully by the time we meet again, we'll have a little more concrete information. Thank you, Julie, for bringing that up, that we are definitely working on that and it's looking promising.
Thanks, Joel. Appreciate that. Wanting to make sure that I address a couple of things in the chat from Carol. Will this work look at those housed by COI, couch surfers, etc., not only shelter folks? What do you mean by that, Carol?
When we're looking at best practices, well, often the conversation here, when we talk about homelessness, we seem to be talking an awful lot about people in the shelters, people in the parks, and less so about the families. This is my interpretation, I should say. Less so about the families and the school kids and the OSU kids that are also homeless. And so I don't know, my question was, when we look at best practices, will we umbrella all of these? So we don't end up with saying, okay, if we want to take homeless people in parks and shelters and move them to homes, this is how we do it. But we haven't addressed this other element of our community that is less visible, but clearly needing attention to them. And I may be just misinterpreting things. I'm not trying to do my normal finger pointing. I'm just, there's just been a lot of conversations that we used to have in HOAC about the families and the 509J kids. And then there's some fairly large number of OSU kids that are homeless. And I want to make sure OSU is a little tricky, but with the other ones that we're taking them into account when we look at how to end homelessness.
I mean, COI is definitely a part of our sheltering system, and they're a part of the numbers for coordinated entry. And I definitely heard Jim talking about, systems that end homelessness. But Jim, I won't speak for you. You raised your hand. Go ahead.
Oh, I just had to keep my speech short, Carol. If I had made it longer, I would have said what you just said. So it's absolutely a priority for me personally to do what you just said.
Jan, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I do see this as what is perceived as homelessness problem by most. I'm just going to be honest here. Much of the community that I hear from are those that are indigent, in the park, and unsheltered. Whereas, our friends and family who are homeless are sometimes invisible, and because they still might have jobs, but they're living in a car, or they are living in a shelter, and they seem to be living normal lives. So there's all kinds of homelessness, and we just make sure that when we're looking at this, the success rate for one demographic versus another demographic might be entirely different depending on what program or system or whatever we're applying. And I just want to make sure that we're completely aware of the whole spectrum of homelessness when we're looking at solutions.
Thanks, Jan. I think it speaks to that communication need too, of understanding all the different individual factors and systemic factors at play, and that there's no one face of folks experiencing homelessness. It means a lot of different things for different people. You have only about 1 minute left. Ari, go for it. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, just a thought came to mind that got me wondering in the built for zero, head towards zero model. If I'm imagining there's some kind of safety net in that model built in order to prevent folks that are on the edge of homelessness from becoming homeless. So I'd be interested in the research to find out if there is something like that is built into that program that would, like, say you've got, most of what you've wanted to do and all the folks housed, say, in that model, but you're accounting for the people that are on the very edge that maybe still are on someone's couch or on the verge of losing their homes. So I'm curious, is in the success of that model to cities that have achieved success, do they have that some sort of safety net built into that? That was just my thought.
Thanks, Ari. I see Jim giving you a thumbs up. So being sure to note that. And I think really the goal that I'm hearing from all of you is to have these two work groups meet before your next meeting and report back and spend some time on both of these topics at your full board meeting in March. Bria, something in the chat from you. Also curious about that, and you believe so. Okay, thank you. Well, it is 6 o'clock. You have accomplished a lot here tonight. Thank you all for being here, and I will follow up with those who have the time to attend a work group on these different topics. If I missed you, please reach out to me and email me if you'd like to be included in those work groups. Thank you so much, everyone, and I'll go ahead and conclude your February 2022 meeting. Thank you. No, Bria, I'm glad you were here in spite of the tech issues. Everybody has them. Everyone has those days.
Thank you so much. It's a great meeting.
Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah,
I'm glad you're
thank you
here.
to all our new members and welcome. I'm certainly glad you're all here.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for allowing me.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you. Paula, are you good on notes? Do you need anything from the chat? You're good? Okay.
Yeah, I'm good. I got it.
Okay, thank
Thanks.
you. And
thanks, Julie.
no problem. Bria, do not worry about your tech issues. I've had days where my camera just won't even turn on. So we've all been there before. Okay, good night, everybody. I'll go ahead and end the meeting.